I want to say thank you for indulging the dialogue. I mean, that was a very traditional sort of lecture mode that I was doing before, and so I thank you for the indulging of my stuttering and my fumbling through some of those things. Hopefully you got enough information that was helpful for you. What I'd like to do now, though, is I'd actually really like to get a little bit of self-assessment, self-awareness going. I think it's very important, and certainly in the practice of therapy and treatment, we certainly value within the culture of mental health the mindful and the aware clinician. And so the exercise that we're going to do through this segment are really built on that process. And I'm not going to lecture you. I'm actually going to just kind of encourage you to kind of think about some topics here. And you're going to do a little bit of writing exercises and some processing on your own. And so you may have to pause from time to time, and I'll cue you in when you need to do that so that you can actually do these works. And I'm going to let you come up with some of your thoughts and some of your ideas, and then encourage you to think about certain areas and what might come from these things. Now, mind you, I'm going to be thinking about some general things that I've heard in the supervision that I've done, and the work that I've done with gay men, and certainly in the faux pas and the mistakes and the things that I've learned along the years that I've been working with gay men. So I hope that you think about these things and you're mindful as you go through, and that really hopefully this segment is going to open some awareness about, and honestly, about your own stuff, because that's what it's meant to do. So, once again, if we're looking at sort of our overview of the 6-hour training, this is segment 2. This is the self-assessment exercises, self-awareness that we're trying to build here. And really just trying to get you aware of the reality is you have lived in a system, more than likely, even if you had a gay affirmative family, or maybe you had gay or lesbian, bisexual, or transgender parents, and you're open to the LGBT community, you still have grown up in a larger culture that has a heteronormative bias. And that is going to be in your psyche, in your system. It's going to be internalized on some level. And so this is really to help you be mindful about that. And these exercises are designed to get you thinking. So there are going to be video clips that you're going to see. And these are, once again, not to upset, not to disrupt, and they're certainly not to offend anyone as you watch these. They're just really to get you to think about what lives within you. And, you know, I'm going to give you some answers that actually come from me. This is where that personal information is going to come in a little bit here, so that you can kind of see that, you know, I do this work, and I have bias. I certainly am part of the LGBT community, and I still have this bias. This is an internalized system that we just have to accept and learn from. So some of the additional resources you may need to do this segment, I want to encourage you, if you don't have nearby, to stop for a moment and go get a journal, a notebook, get some paper in general. Something to write on. If you're there with your computer, maybe you will actually just do a computer journal. I mean, I think maybe you'll blog about it. However this works for you, do something creative, but there are going to be some writing exercises that you're going to need to do for this portion, and so I just want to encourage you to find some way to do that. Heck, if you've got your iPad or whatever, you like to use your phone, your smartphone, then get that out and do some bullet point journaling if you need to. Well, and if you guys are old school, I guess I think in old school when I think about getting the notebook and the journal out, I think there's a value to actually physically writing something, so get your writing utensils. So even if you type it, if that works best for you, great. I think there's something about writing that gets stuff out of us. Now that's a very, I guess, biased in the realm of psychotherapy. It's certainly, I'm biased in that direction, and we certainly talk about journaling a lot in our profession, so it's okay for us to do a little bit of that too. I actually think this is going to be a method for you to process when you're working with gay men, is to actually keep a journal, and that's actually what I'm going to try to help you create today, is what I call a presuppositional journal. Sometimes this is referred to as a countertransference journal. It's your own processing. I think it's good to have when you're working with clients so that you're mindful of what's coming out in you so you can keep a check on that. There are going to be some public forums that you're going to use for, at least, I think there may be one, maybe two for this segment. So those you'll use after or sometimes in between, where you'll pause and you'll stop, and you may go and post on the public forum. We certainly want you engaging in that and having a discussion with each other, so that you may find that some of your own bias, your biases, are going to be similar to other people's bias. So I think it's good to see that and to process that as a group, and that's what the public forums are for. You're going to need some courage. You're going to need to be able to look within yourself and do some hard looking to do this work. I think that's a good practice in being a mental health clinician. It's certainly a good practice in doing any work where you're helping another person and you're engaging in work that deals with the psyche. So I hope that you can muster some courage to do these things. If you find yourself resisting some of the exercises, I'm going to encourage you to be mindful of the fact that that may be an indication of the bias. If you do these, I don't perceive that these may harm you in any way in these explorations. At the same time, if this brings up discomfort for you, then that's a good place to journal. It's certainly also a good place to do your own therapeutic work. And it's certainly a good place to be mindful and grow personally. So it's going to take a little bit of courage. An open mind is going to be extremely helpful. It takes an open mind to really look at our own stuff. I like to say our own junk. We all have a clutter of things that we've gathered in our development. Some of it's very useful. Some of it's very wise. Some of it is just going to be the stuff that mucks things up. So if you have a willingness to self-reflect, you're going to get a lot out of these exercises. I like reflective practices. I like self-reflection. I like mindfulness. I certainly find that you have to have that in working with gay men. And you actually have to increase that as a skill for your gay male clients. There's got to be a lot of self-reflection in the work that you do with them. So I like to be mindful of models of cultural competence. So that's a really important area for me. Not just in the work with the LGBT community, but that's another area that I really kind of throw my energy and my time as cultural competence. What does that mean, and how do we do that as mental health clinicians? Well, I'm a big fan of the old Sue and Sue model and the original writing in Sue and Sue in 2002, and it's certainly occurred in their revisions and additions later, and has occurred in numerous research and reports later. Is the awareness, knowledge, and skills model. I've heard it referred to as the ASK model, but actually if we follow the acronym in order, it would be AKS. And really, it seems to be in that order for a reason. So the awareness component of that model is that we must have self-awareness. This isn't awareness of the other person, although we certainly want that as well. We need to have self-awareness, which really goes into the place of, do we know what our areas of bias are? Do we know what impacts us? Do we know what our buttons are? How are those pushed? From the work that I do, I think about what is my complex and how is that going to manifest in a therapeutic session, and how do I keep my stuff out while still being mindful that it informs and helps me in the process in many ways. The knowledge component is certainly about knowledge about the cultures that you work with, and we really need to take that from sort of a polarized sense to the term intersectional comes to mind, which is that the person sitting in front of you isn't just one attribute. You're dealing with, when you're dealing with your gay male client, you're dealing with, I like Venn diagrams, one circle that says gay, and whatever that uniquely means to him. You may see male or man, and that has a circle to it, and that may be unique and individual to him. And both of these being influenced by a lot of dynamics that are external, but there's also internal identification that's going on here. That, I said this earlier, this may include ethnicity, race specifically, familial components, religious components, and spirituality, SES, so on and so forth. we need to have knowledge about all those different spheres that make up our individual client that's sitting in front of us so that we can tailor our work for the individual. And really that moves us into the last piece. That's why I think it really moves in an order here, which is the skills component. You have to have that self-awareness, you've got to have that knowledge, and so that you can apply the skills therapeutically in a mindful and a skillful way. This is really the artistry of cultural competence, is how do we now take that information, how do we actually use that information without assuming and projecting cultural information onto our clients, while keeping mindful of what these dynamics might mean, these external experiences and development over time, how that might influence the client. Okay. And certainly, we're going to talk a little bit about the guidelines a bit as far as cultural competence and self-awareness. And in this process, the guidelines come from APA. There's a link actually once again in your references, and there's a hyperlink there that you can click and go to the APA website. I'm using these once again because I really have found that these, for me, have been the best guidelines. Well, Guideline 4 says this, that we really need to be mindful of how our beliefs and opinions and experiences about gay men may affect treatment. How do they positively affect treatment, but how may the bias, how may they negatively impact, how may we pathologize our gay male clients, the gay men that we see, in ways that are really about the culture of psychology or even our own spheres of culture that are intersectional and intercede with each other, and how they may both complement and contrast against the client that we have in front of us. And certainly there's a push in Guideline 4 that we seek consultation and we refer out when our stuff is getting in the way here. Or we refer out when we don't have the expertise needed to deal with all of the dynamics of the individual sitting in front of us. And that as we learn this process, we get supervision, we get consultation, and we stay mindful of our own stuff. So one of the things that we have to be mindful of in self-awareness is bias. We all have it. You need to just accept that right now. If you accept that right now, the whole rest of this component is going to be, of this segment is going to be much better for you. You'll be a much better clinician if you just buy into the fact that you have bias. You have heterosexual notions, you have gender notions that are part of both the dominant culture and all of those different intersectional pieces that make up who you are. There are some explicit ones that you'll know. There are explicit and overt, and there are implicit things, things that you learn, things that are subtle. This is the place where microaggressions are born from, is how we sort of have these implicit things. I once knew a really good clinician, a very mindful clinician, who when she heard the word gay, bent her hand and said, "Oh, really, darling?" and didn't realize how offensive that might be because she was playing out a stereotype. Maybe she was being playful, however, and maybe one person may not take that as offense, but when those sort of stereotypes are perpetuated with someone who may not live that stereotype, it can be very harmful. Once again, though, we also don't want to demonize that gay men who are feminine are somehow bad and that they don't exist. In fact, there's much more allowance for femininity for gay men when we talk about the gay male culture as a whole. So we just have to be mindful of the explicit and the implicit bias that we may have. So this is where we get into that heteronormative and that heterosexist lens. So just accept that somewhere within you, amongst all the other areas of bias, you have been taught for the majority of your life, if not by your family, if not by your spirituality, by more of the dominant culture, there's a strong likelihood that you've learned that normative is heterosexual. That those two things are equated, that normal is heterosexual and heterosexual is normal. And that's created an ism naturally within you. It's within me. It absolutely is within me. I have to catch myself with my own heterosexist language many times. You also have lenses about gender and gender expression. that there are certain places that you feel the most comfortable when men are acting a certain way and women are acting a certain way. And that may not match, that how you feel about women may not match how you feel about men. You may consciously even say to yourself, you know, I am open to anything. I am open to any gender expression. And that may be very well consciously true. And yet there's still that sort of genderism that we all have. I will tell you, here's one of mine, I'll tattle on myself for a second here, which is I still, to this day, have to catch myself. I grew up in a very, very, very rigid culture. I grew up in southern Mississippi, in cultures that, in a family system that was very, very strict about things like race and spirituality and gender expression. And so, to this day, I have to be very mindful of when someone says the word doctor, lawyer, that I don't automatically say, oh, what do you think of him? And not automatically go to the word him. And that's where I recognize my bias in gender. And I often, you know, I've gotten much better with saying or her pretty quickly. But that's not what I grew up with. And that's certainly a part of my system that I work with all the time to make sure that that does not interfere with the work that I do. And so, especially as an instructor, I have to be very mindful in my classes, especially when my classes are predominantly female, most often, that I make sure that I'm very inclusive and gender neutral in my language in here, like I would be with my LGBT clients. All right. So, we have to really know what lives within us. What kind of lives in the places that we can see and what lives in the places that we cannot see. What lives within us. And only through self-exploration and self-reflection do we ever really get to the truth of that. Usually the first answer that we come to is the defensive answer. It's the, I don't want to be a bad person, however we label a bad person. I want to be a good person. So whatever is defined as good, whether that be heteronormative or not, we're going to want to align with that consciously. And we need to get past that and actually just accept that there are these things that live within us that we just need to be aware of, because it lives within all of us. So we need to be aware and mindful, and we need to be that way in a mindful stance throughout our work with clients. We need to become well informed in the work that we do, and as we become more aware and more mindful, we're going to be more informed about the impact on our clients if we understand the impact on ourselves. How culture and how our experiences have actually impacted us are going to inform us about how our clients developed. I often ask people, you know, when did you know that you were whatever, heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual, because that's the question that my gay male clients are often asked. When did you know your sexual orientation was this? And oftentimes with people who fall into the heteronormative line, they fall behind that line, that's not a question they've ever asked themselves. And so that just gives you a chance to think, well, did I ever decide about my sexuality? So that just kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about here. So I want to talk a little bit about what you need to know to practice ethically and effectively. You got to be aware of your own biases. I've been preaching that now for the last few minutes, so that seems clear. We've got to be aware. You've got to be aware of the lenses that exist for you and how you see the world. And you need to understand that you may be consciously engaging in biased behavior or attitudes even when you're not conscious of this. When you're trying to do well, you may still be engaging in some of the biased behavior. So self-awareness and acceptance is our key. This is how we manage it. We say it's there, it's going to come out, so I just need to be aware of that it's there and it's going to come out, and then I can prepare to manage for it.